Um,
There we go. It's now set to record.
Gail, what time shall we wait? Shall we wait till 8:05?
No, we'll wait at 8 o'clock. I'll set it to go onto Facebook at 8.
Okay.
So if you want to start at 8, that's 1 minute past 8, or it's completely your decision.
I think we should wait till 8:05.
Yeah.
Just because Jewish timekeeping isn't very good.
It's called Jewish Mean Time.
Jewish Mean Time, exactly. 8 usually means 8:15, but we won't push it as much as that. Gail, should I be optimistic and just go on to airplane mode?
Yes, if you want to.
I think I should, because otherwise my phone starts ringing on.
That's really messy.
Hi, Sam.
Hello. I'm just noticing my messy background.
Oh, it's absolutely fine. We're just looking at your fabulous hair.
Oh, thank you.
From anything. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
It all looks very shabby chic. Do you know what I mean? Hippie chic.
It looks like books in a mess.
Yeah, it looks clever.
Shall I have a quick tidy up?
No, it's fine. Now's your time to relax and take a drink. I said we'll wait till Sam, we'll wait till 8:05.
Right. I'm sure lots of people will come on.
I don't know. I never really expect anyone. We'll see.
I know you don't, but you're a superstar. Loads of people will come on.
I know. We'll have to wait and see. I think we should start punctually because there's quite a few people waiting. 22.
I think so.
What do you think? Gail, I can't hear you.
I think you should start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to start. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We've got today a big privilege to have Dr. Chloe Mitchell, who's a psychologist who specializes in grief. And today, to mark Mental Health Weekend, we are going to be discussing grief and the effect it has on our mental health. Chloe, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself to start off? Can you hear clearly, by the way, everyone?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'm Dr. Chloe. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. Yeah, so I'm a psychologist. I've been doing this for more than 20 years now, and specialized in understanding traumatic loss and supporting people from all walks of life embrace life again after an extremely difficult loss. I do a lot of other work in my clinical practice, and never in a million years that I imagine the pandemic and the tsunami of grief that we've encountered over the last 2.5 years. So what I want to offer today is as much kind of advice and guidance and kind of tips for you, and do I see it as a very informal session. It'd be really good if you want to interrupt and ask questions, or definitely we'll make time at the end for questions. And if anybody has a more personal question, I'm more than happy to give you a bit of my time afterwards. And I hope we have a good time, you know.
Excellent. So I think what we'll do is we'll probably talk for about 40 minutes, and then perhaps we'll open it up that if anyone feels they want to ask anything, then please feel free to put some questions onto the chat room, and then we'll come to it at the end. So firstly, Dr. Chloe, have you got any experience in the bereavement process in the Jewish faith at all?
I am not Jewish myself, but I have supported people coping with loss, particularly more recently, people who have lost loved ones and haven't been able to be with them for all sorts of reasons, either travel restrictions or local COVID restrictions. But I'd be really interested to hear from you what your specific kind of approach in the Jewish faith is. That'd be really, really helpful for me.
So actually bereavement in our Jewish faith is something which actually inspires me a lot, because especially in my work as a bereavement counsellor, I work for the JBCS. It's helped me to understand how brilliant and forward actually our way of mourning is. I think so many people feel they have to have this stiff upper lip and to be strong and to be brave, etc. And the Jewish approach, actually, the more I learn about bereavement and the more I have experience with bereavement, actually sits very comfortably with the process that a person will go through. Now, firstly, my experience has been is that there's no normal and everyone grieves in a different way. But I have felt that it's so important to be able to grieve and to be able to be sad and not to be brave. So in the Jewish tradition, what we do is the first week is called the Shiva week, and we are meant to ideally literally spend a week talking about our loved ones. So actually it's quite wrong when it becomes a social affair and people are talking about their holidays and chit-chatting. The idea is to really focus on the loss and to cry and to be sad. In one of our books, the Ecclesiastes, I think it's called in English, we are told, you know, there's a time to be happy, there's a time to be sad, there's a time to mourn, you know, there's a time for everything in life, and therefore it's part of life to be able to grieve. So we have this time where that week is an intense week where we're meant to feel that pain and sit with that pain and cry with people and talk about the pain. And then after the week, we have something called the Shloshim, which is the first month. And that is also, you know, you've got this cocoon of being able to have the excuse to not go out and to be able to still stay a bit hermit-like, etc. And then as the year goes on, we're encouraged to try and get back to some sort of normality. And for people who haven't lost a spouse, like if you've lost a parent, there's different rules. After a year, you're allowed to do certain things which you're not allowed to do during the year, things like buying new clothing and dancing at weddings and things which are very joyous. And I have to say from a personal experience, and it's actually very refreshing for me to be able to speak personally, because in my workplace, I'm never allowed to be personal. And sometimes, you know, when I'm working with a client, I'm biting my lip and I'm like, oh, I know exactly how you feel. So from a personal perspective, and from going through a loss and losing my mother at a young age, and going through the trauma of it, I felt that the stages that we were told that we were meant to do actually was the greatest way to be able to get through the process. And so for me, when I do have a client who's trying to be brave, or families who are saying, you know, she's still not herself and she's still struggling, and it makes me frustrated that I feel like they should understand that no, they have to be sad and they have to feel that sadness. So to me, I think that we have formulated a very, very good sort of box. But you know, sometimes the second year can be even more difficult than the first year. There are no rules. There are definitely no rules. But we know because of the pandemic that things have been exacerbated so much more. And the idea of Jewish guilt, which is really strong, you know, people, for me, when I think about people who weren't there with their loved ones when they were so ill and when they were dying and they couldn't have a proper funeral and a proper Shiva, I would love to know from you, how do you think that has impacted on your clients, and how that can be somehow helped as time goes on?
I really have seen a lot of that over the last couple of years for the obvious reasons. And there is no fixing it, is there? I think it's completely normal to feel, you know, the guilt and the despair and the angst that you weren't able to be there to do the normal end of life care and support, and to not be able to sort of lean into the traditions of your religious practice to guide you through those stages of adapting to a new way of life without your loved one. So what I always recommend to all my clients is really resonate with everything you've said, because there is no fixed linear journey through grief. Is absolutely personal. It's absolutely vital to allow the sadness to make its home in you for as long as you need it. And if you find that you're experiencing grief, that guilt, excuse me, it's important to accept it as a very normal human response to the limits, to the restrictions, and what you weren't able to do that you would have liked to have done. And really, I think a way of holding that guilt rather than becoming captive by it is to try and reframe it and look at it as it's something that happened to you because of circumstances beyond your control, rather than something done by you. And seeking comfort in talking about your feelings, the sadness, the grief, the despair, the anger, the sense of lostness, you know, just allowing it to be heard, to be validated. If you've got, it sounds like you've got a brilliant community to talk to each other, to support each other, and to process it. And we do know from a psychological point of view that we have feelings for a reason. And when they're heard, when they're made sense of, and when they're validated in the sort of from human to human, we can move through them, we can move beyond them. And there is no such thing as the stages of grief. There is no predictable time frame. So I really love what you were saying about the structure, but as you say, you know, maybe the second year will bring another set of challenges. And in my work, a lot of
disappointment, sometimes it's the disappointment of feeling like, why aren't I feeling better?
Yeah, well, I think also what we don't talk about very often, in my experience, is that grief is expansive. It's never really done. The rawness of it changes, and we learn to move through it, get support, and reconstruct a new way of being ourselves, a new kind of normal. But the second year can sometimes be harder because it's been longer. It's you miss them more, you don't miss them less. So there's something about finding empathy and compassion for yourself in order to have that sense of internal safety. Because my experience of loss, and what I see in my work all the time, is that when we lose a significant other, the world as we knew it no longer makes sense. And because of that, we don't feel safe. We don't feel we know who we are. Everything is impacted. Everything, all aspects of our life and our sense of self is reconstructed. And that takes time, right? It takes a lot of time.
So on that topic, you know, I'd love to know, you know, it's normal to feel sad. It's normal to feel angry. It's normal to feel despondent. When does it get to a point where one has to seek help, and it's something which becomes a mental health issue, and it's something which needs, you know, advice and guidance? When does it move from being normal to feel sad and despondent and angry and helpless to needing actually some help?
Okay, there's no quick fix to that, and I would never be too prescriptive, but what I encounter a lot, I think we do live in a culture that kind of doesn't want to encounter sadness and negative feelings. People have a compulsion to fix your grief. Very good intention. So what that means is people swallow it. They kind of compartmentalize it. A lot of people are having to do that in order to get through the crises of the pandemic. And that, you know, I don't judge that, but at some point you need to sort of allow yourself to go through the grief, or they bottle it up. And we know that the burden of bottling up that kind of despair and sadness starts to kind of take hold of your physical health and your mental health, and can start to start to disrupt your sense of well-being, because mental health is really your subjective measure of your well-being. And your well-being is a sense that you're making a great contribution to your community and you're happy with life, and you are reaching your potential. And when you're bottling up your grief, you can't have that sense of well-being for the obvious reasons. So talking about your grief, finding a way to validate it for yourself and with another, either a professional or a loved one, is hugely, hugely helpful, and a big preventative measure. Because from a sort of research point of view, we know that when we have a negative feeling, it has a negative charge, and it kind of, we can feel it in our body. And the only thing that reduces that negative charge from a sort of neurological, let's say neuropsychological point of view, is being heard, and accepted and loved kind of unconditionally in our despair, in our sadness, because we're wired that way. We're social beings. We seek comfort and healing through that process. So it becomes a high risk thing when we bottle it up and we start allowing it to build in the body. And a lot of people can feel grief taking hold of them, and then you start medicating, you start making irrational decisions, you might start drinking a lot, and it can become either sort of quite difficult depression, and once you're in the grip of it, quite difficult to get out of it. Or if you've been through a very traumatic time, it can get hold of you in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder. So the only reason therapy helps, I'm sure you'll agree with this, because you can create a safe holding relationship where you can make sense of your experience, your internal world.
Well, I think that for most of us who are watching this discussion, most of us are lucky enough to be part of a community. And part of a community is very, very holding. And I've read a book recently, which I'm sure you've read, which was Sheryl Sandberg's book called Option B. And at the moment, it's my favorite take on grief. For anyone who doesn't know, Sheryl Sandberg is the CEO of Facebook, and her husband very tragically died aged 47 years old whilst he was running on a running machine in Mexico on holiday. And it's actually a brilliant book, and it's a brilliant book to help people to understand how to behave to someone who is grieving. Firstly, she talks about how her guilt about thinking, if I could have done something different and what happened, but she brings a few different examples which really resonated with me, that when you were talking about people not quite knowing how to behave, and only when you've experienced something do you really change how you behave. So something so little, like she said to me, she said in the book that when someone said to her, how are you? She found it almost offensive, because what do you want me to answer? Whereas she said, by changing one word and adding the word, how are you today? It changes the whole picture, because it makes the person feel that I know that you're struggling, and I know that you're suffering, and I know that you're having a hard time, but how are you today? Because there will be ups and downs. And, she said, naturally, as human beings, we want to make everything better. We're not comfortable with seeing someone sad. So, she talks about how she used to say to a person who was a cancer patient, oh, you're going to be fine, until she realized, it's not for me to say you're going to be fine, but I need you to feel that I'm with you. And, by saying something, we're here for you, and I'm going to bring over supper, and I'm going to bring over pizza. And is there any toppings that you do like, rather than, can I make you something, which is actually also a very Jewish tradition, bringing over the food and all the sort of nurturing and supportive things that a community can do will really help the person to hopefully open up and be able to be honest with their feelings, because certain comments can actually be very painful. When people are just trivial about it, it can actually really be painful.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I do love what Sheryl talks about with her Plan B book. And sometimes another little tip that I offer in the hope that it helps people is, when you've just lost somebody and you're in the rawness of it, and it's only been a few days or a couple of weeks, you can't really make sense of what you're experiencing. You'll find yourself in that what we would call a psychologist the acute stress response phase, and that's when the body almost responds before the mind's had a chance to catch up with it. And in that phase and throughout grief, it can be quite a relief to ask a question like, tell me what's happening, rather than how are you feeling, or how are you? Well, how are you today? I think it's a really good idea, because when you make it about, well, tell me what's happening, then that gives the person who's coping with loss a kind of way forward. Well, this happened and that happened, and as you say, making it easy, hands on deck. That's what I say, you know, just turning up and offering support and listening, just listening, and not making it about you. It's all.
And what about the classic British stiff upper lip and, you know, need to be brave, and I don't want the children to be upset, and I don't want the children to see me crying. How would you sort of deal with someone who you felt wasn't grieving and wasn't letting themselves be sad and wasn't allowing their emotions to follow a natural course? How would you try to help someone to allow themselves to feel the pain?
I think it's really important to understand what that person's life situation is, what their context is, what support they have, and there are lots of things that I would recommend. One of them is, don't assume that showing grief to your younger people in the family is a bad thing, because if it's done in a coherent and kind of age appropriate fashion, it's showing children that if mummy or daddy can tolerate sadness, then I can learn to tolerate it too. And having an opportunity as a family to talk about what this sadness is revealing, it's really about love. Learning to talk about that safely is a good thing. It's a good life skill. So I think we need to sort of do what we can to shift this attitude that we must protect our children from all negative feelings, because we can't. They need to be skilled to deal with it. And in my experience, when a family has a shared perspective and a story about what's happened and how they're coping with it, what each person is feeling and thinking, and how they're honoring the legacy of their loved one, actually helps them embrace life better. It really helps. What's your experience?
I mean, I have said that to people in the past, you know, when they say to me that they worry about their children seeing them cry, and I feel very strongly it's important for your children to see you cry. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think naturally, as human beings, we want to be happy. We want to function. And sometimes we feel frustrated. And then sometimes there's the flip side. If a person is able to enjoy and is able to laugh, then they feel guilty. You know, am I not showing respect to my loved one? Am I not showing respect to the person that I've lost? Which is, it's quite a sensitive balance, isn't it?
Very personal, I think, and very, very difficult. And it's never in a fixed state, is it? So some days you might be more comfortable with enjoying a moment and having a laugh and enjoying the privilege of life, and then a couple of days later you feel horrible. You feel so sad, angry. It's all in a state of flux, isn't it? And I think being kind to ourselves with it is absolutely essential. Just being, I often say to my clients, well, you're really good at being empathic and caring and sympathetic to other people, but how are you with you? What's your relationship with you through this? What do you need? What anchors you? What gives you meaning? Where do you go?
Well, that comes back to the idea of guilt, which we brought up before, you know, the concept of guilt. And very often when a person passes away, you know, I think one never feels one's done enough, or one that I'd say most of the time, I think most of the time there is some element of guilt. How would you help someone if they've got guilt about perhaps not being with a person when they passed away, perhaps about regrets they have during their life, perhaps things that they've done which they wouldn't have done? How can a person move on?
Well, I would accept that they're feeling that, and I would try and normalize it and say it's part of the journey, it's part of being a human being. And there's a way of in accepting it and expressing it, we can look for the lessons, we can look for the wisdom in it, and what can we glean from it, what can we learn that's going to help us embrace life in a kind of meaningful way. What connections do we want? What would our loved ones say about this guilt that we are carrying, and do we need to carry it as intensely as we do? So again, as with everything, it's about being empathic and compassionate to yourself. So accept that if you feel guilt, that's okay. It doesn't make you, it just, because you feel it doesn't mean that you should feel it. It's just process it, allow it to move through you.
I mean, I think
That's
it's the finality. I think that's what, certainly for me, I feel that when a person passes away, it's that finality which is so hard to accept. So hard to accept that finality. And then with time, reflection and thinking about what could and what would, etc. And it's something very, very, very difficult to be able to move on from.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I was just thinking as you were saying that sometimes we might have actually done something wrong or let ourselves down or betrayed our values. And I think one idea that I have found in my from my training and experience is looking at ourselves with humanity. So maybe some things aren't that forgivable, but we can forgive our sense of being confused or being a bit lost as human beings, and through that I think we can all grow. And yeah, the finality, I think that's what makes grief so difficult. And one of the most important things, I'm sure you do a lot of work in this as well, is finding a way to maintain a connection, an ongoing bond with your loved one that's departed.
What helpful tips would you give to someone?
Oh my goodness, I'd love to hear yours as well. Talking to them is one. I always encourage my clients, and almost every client I've ever supported has a chat with their loved one quite regularly. Finding ways to include them in family events, doing things in their honor, helping others in their honor, doing charities in their honor, or living by their legacy. This is what my mom was like, this is what I learned from her, and I'm going to follow in her footsteps. That's so meaningful and comforting. Respecting important dates. What about you? Have you got any?
So I think actually the one which jumps out to me is knowing, and I think most people know what their loved one would want them to do in any given situation. And when you're in that situation, when you do what spouse, that father, that mother, that sister, that grandma would want you to do, there is a huge amount of comfort in that, because you feel as if that you're doing exactly what they'd want you to do.
Yeah, I like that. It's a really lovely idea, and I agree, totally agree. And normalizing that feeling the depths of grief is part of our humanity, is part of the significance of our bond, and it really is love turning up and needing an outlet, isn't it?
Definitely.
Without a doubt, and being kind about that and making it okay. That's a really important thing.
So would you say, as far as tips to help someone, is just really just showing that you are with them, that they are not alone on the journey, that you are feeling for them, that you want to listen to them, rather than, hi, how are you? How's your father? How's your mom? And which just is a bit of an, non-question, because you're not going to stand in the supermarket and really say how you feel. So it's just really, would you say it's really just about giving that person the time and the space to feel you really want to hear how they're feeling?
Absolutely. And also to gauge them, maybe bumping into them in the supermarket when they're busy and they've got to go to work. They might not want to sort of be met with questions that might be derailing. Or if you're going back to work and you're supporting a colleague coping with a loss. So kind of letting them know that you've got them in your thoughts, that you're there, that you're offering help and listening unconditionally, and normalizing what they feel. Just letting them know kind of that you hear them. And I really like that. The how are you question is not ideal, but if you ask, how are you really? I'm here, and I want to hold you with this. I want to be with you in this. That can be really affirming. And for some people, it's an opportunity to rewrite their grief, to look at the story they're telling themselves about life, and about who they are and how they're going to live with this, how they're going to embrace life again. And we can get so much from talking it through, can't we?
And what would you do? We did touch on it beforehand. You know, there is no normal, and everyone grieves in a different way, and it's normal to feel sad, etc., and all the different experiences that you might feel. But if you have a loved one who you feel isn't getting out of bed and isn't eating and isn't looking after themselves, and you feel this is serious, how is, you know, they're in a very vulnerable situation. And if you told them, you know, if you told them straight up, you know, I think you're depressed and we need to go, that might be really damaging. What would you think the best way to deal with something like that was, when you have serious concern that it's going to a point where it's actually really impacting on mental health, and it's that they're really ill with it?
It's really hard, isn't it? But I think, yeah, striking the right balance and the right tone is essential. I'm taking a moment to pause because I think so much of how a person handles grief is personal and influenced by a whole number of things. So what other stresses they're dealing with, what's happening in their home, what other losses they've experienced, what their mental health is like already, whether they're all, you know, they're coping with the loss, but they're also coping with huge financial stress, or they are coping with a divorce, or, you know, who knows, all sorts of things play out. So hopefully, if somebody wants to take a day in bed and you know, not engage, that's okay. Again, normalizing it. I'm here for you. I'll get you some dinner. I'll get you a cup of tea, etc. If it goes anywhere beyond 2 weeks and they are disengaged, they are in a dark cloud and they don't want to get out of bed, and they don't want to, they're not relating to you, then that is a real sign that major depression is on its way. You have to take action, and it has to be quite urgent. But I think there's a way of communicating it where it's not seen as a kind of a weakness, but it's seen as we need to get support to prevent you from getting any worse. Just like we would if somebody's having a physical health problem, is normalizing getting support for a mental health problem.
Well, that's why it's so important to talk. You know, I just know myself, when I lost my mother, I can't tell you, I walked into WH Smith, I told the one person behind the counter, I went to the fishmonger. That was I just felt I just had to talk about it. It was just somehow my way of dealing with it. And going back to Sheryl Sandberg's book, what she says, which is also very interesting, is that people don't want to cause pain to another person, but sometimes making a person cry or get overcome, you're doing them a favor. So she said, you know, she would have thought before she lost her husband, oh, I don't want to remind the person about what's happened, and I don't want to ask them, it might upset them. Whereas after she lost her husband, she said, it's not as if she's forgetting for a minute that she's lost her husband. So if someone said to her, how are you managing and how are you doing, etc., she liked that, because it was validating her pain, rather than what she thought originally, which was, I don't want to ask them about how she's managing, and is it the time of the anniversary of her mum's death or her dad's death, etc., because worry that, oh no, that might upset them. You know, when I'm in situations and people, you know, well up, or people get emotional, I feel sad that they're sad, but I always feel that it's a bit of a breakthrough and that it's actually good.
I totally agree. I think it's so important. And something we seem to have forgotten is that actually our relationships, our bonds are deepened when we can trust ourselves to be vulnerable with each other. It's not when we're perfect and everything's fantastic and I haven't got any problems. Those relationships don't ever deepen. But it's so interesting to hear your story, because I reacted in the opposite way. I was a teenager and I lost a friend very tragically, and I pretended everything was fine and I didn't tell anybody. It was a very traumatic event, and that caused me so many difficulties with my own mental health, with my own sense of
Chloe, you're a classic example, actually, if you don't mind putting me putting in the spot. You know, when we spoke about the dangers of not grieving, you know, you obviously sort of kept it inside in a box for a while.
I did, for years.
Right. And then what happened? What's the danger of that happening?
Well, it's a terrible thing to do. And I was only 16, so I was very young and I didn't have the right guidance. And I don't blame anybody. I don't think anybody knew how to handle it, because it was an unusually violent event. And I ended up starving myself for quite a long time, became very anorexic, very good in school, very kind of, you know, life's, you know, on paper from the outside, it all looked very good, but my internal world was quite malnourished, quite depleted. I was very lost. And it's how I ended up doing this job. So I studied psychology because I thought, what's going on? What I kind of had a sense that there was something I wasn't doing right, you know. And I had a very kind of English family upbringing that were very much, well, you know, we don't talk about it, let's bottle it up. They didn't know any better. And that's what, you know, many years of therapy and training and specializing in this is how I ended up doing it. And I really feel like I've kind of experienced that journey of the value of not only connecting to yourself and being kind and accepting what's going on for you internally, but allowing yourself to receive support and validation from others.
So you really are a classic example of someone who didn't talk about their grief, and it really impacted on your emotional health and on so many different aspects of your life.
It did, but I managed to sort of flip it around, and I feel like I got a lot of wisdom from it as well in some way.
Of course.
It's enriched me, but it's it's also given me that lived experience that you don't want to bottle it up. It's very, very bad for you.
Well, I traditionally I try to be very positive, and I'd love to end on a positive note. So I would love to know any positive advice that you can give, or a hopeful message that you can share for people who have struggled.
I think
most of the people here have loved and lost and have experienced some grief, etc. And so, you know, is there something which we can end off before we have the questions with a hopeful message that people can take with them?
I really love the work of Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've come across it.
My favorite book in the world.
Is it? Oh, well, mine too. And I really, you know, I take a lot from the potential to embrace life again is a big positive for me. And although we might be devastated by events and our losses, we can embrace life if we reconstruct life with meaning. So in my research and my work, it seems that people find comfort in having beautiful, loving connections, and that can really lift you through the suffering. It can really hold you beyond it. So that's definitely, I think, we have the capacity for wisdom. And
well, Viktor Frankl says that, you know, Viktor Frankl, who was in the camps, he said that his famous quote is that any person can choose to act how they're going to behave in any given event. You know, you don't have a choice of what's going to happen to you, but the way you react to it is purely, you know, your own decision.
Having a kind of meaningful response and thinking, well, what's going to imbue my life with meaning? How can I conduct myself? What can I learn from this in terms of my spiritual being and my social being? That's so powerful. And actually, when we reach that turning point, we kind of have a form of acceptance, and what comes with that is a huge whoosh of creative energy, so much potential to care for others, connect to others, give to others. And I think that's a really positive message.
It is a really positive message. And coming back to my latest favorite book, the Sheryl Sandberg book, and something which really resonated to me, but interestingly enough, I can share it with the people who are listening here, but obviously I can't share it in my work, is she says what helps is gratitude.
Oh gosh, yes.
So, you know, as therapists, we can't tell our clients, you know, you should think about what you've got good in your life. But as us sitting here together and discussing this, you know, she talks about the fact that the more she thought about what she had to be grateful for, the more she was able to manage. And I think when one has had a loss, and there is so much sadness and so much anger and so much pain, and if one's able to focus on how there were little glimmers of brightness, and that things could, you know, I don't know, if a loved one passed away peacefully, if a loved one didn't have pain, if a loved one was able to see family members, you know, all the little things that a person might not even think about, that will help them hopefully to be able to move on. But I'd say in many ways one doesn't really ever properly move on. I think one gets used to it, but I don't think one does ever properly move on. And the other interesting thing is that it's the littlest things which will spark you off, which will make someone emotional. I mean, I had a client recently, and she said she was fine. She went to her mother's stone setting, and then the synagogue asked for her mum's chocolate cake recipe, and she couldn't leave the house for a day. So there's no knowing of what's going to spark you off. But I think perhaps the message that I'd like to give everyone now is that idea of trying to do what your loved one wants you to do and what they would be proud for you to do, and to really just accept your pain and to be able to try and talk about it and express how you're feeling and accept people's love and help, because they want to help you, they want to be there for you.
And that's beautiful.
Is there anything that you'd like to end off with, Chloe?
I totally resonate with what you're saying. Be kind to yourself and loving, and let people help and talk about it. And in my research, I do a lot of research in understanding grief. You know, the one thing that is always present is that the sadness never really goes away. You'll be sad, and that's normal. Normal.
And it's okay to not be okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you so much. It's so insightful, and everything you've said has got such a level of understanding to people's characters, etc. And we really appreciate you being here. And I'd like to know if anyone wants to ask any questions. I don't know what the best way to do it would be, either to unmute or to put a question in the chat if you're uncomfortable asking anything.
It doesn't seem like I can see where the chat is, so
I also can't see the chat, which is,
so if people want to unmute themselves to ask a question, that would probably be the easiest way, if anyone's got a question.
I think it's been so clear that no one's got any questions.
It's the kind of, I find that sometimes this topic is so, you know, because it connects us with our losses, that sometimes we can't jump into sort of question mode.
Well, we have someone. We've got Wayne.
All right, okay.
And Wayne, we'd love to hear what question you have to ask. Thank you for being so brave.
You're welcome. It's been fascinating, and thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, if enjoyment is the correct term. I remember when my late mother passed away, which is now some years ago. A friend of my mother-in-law, a lady that I'm quite fond of, wrote to me by email to give me her condolences, and I responded back to her by saying, "When does the pain go away?" And she responded back with a line that I've never forgotten. She said, "The first 17 years are the worst." Yeah, and I think she's right. And I wonder when the pain does go away, or does it ever go away? Or is it just the case that I've just got to learn to live with it, and that's it? So that's my question.
Chloe?
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to know what your take would be, and then I'm happy to say what I'd think.
Yeah, my instinctive response is that you'll learn it's about, what am I trying to say? I want to say learning to live with the pain, but I find that a little bit too prescriptive. It's sort of almost like the pain carries a message. What's its message for you? And what does it mean for you to pay attention to the message? It's not pain for the sake of pain. It's pain that represents a significant loss, a significant bond. And I don't think that ever goes away. I think we develop a courageous kind of way of making sense of it and honoring it. Does that make sense? I hope I've made sense, but maybe you can add something to it as well.
So I agree with you, Chloe, and I think also it depends very much on the circumstances. You know, if a person has lost a loved one and they're elderly, you know, on one hand, it's never the right time. And, you know, a couple that have been so devoted and love each other for many years, it's very painful. But there's something peaceful about having those years and having that time together. Whereas if someone's lost someone from an illness or with suffering or at a young age, it's very, 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 very difficult to be able to be at peace with it. So I tend to agree with you, and I tend to agree with this lady who said 17 years. I'm not up to 17 years yet losing my mum, but I think it doesn't get easier. You just learn to live with it better. You know, you just learn to somehow be able to get on with your life, whereas at the beginning you just can't focus on anything else. That's the way I would describe it.
Sure.
Any other questions? I can't actually see all the participants on my computer, so I don't know if anyone else is putting their hand up. Gail, is anyone asking any questions?
No,
I can't see any other hands up.
No other hands have come up. Everyone's quiet.
Okay. All righty. Okay. In that case, if there's no other questions, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to wish everyone strength who has lost and have loved and lost, and to hope, please God, that we will share healthy, happy times. And just to remember that message of holding that person in your heart and continuing to do what they would want you to do. And that, to me, is probably the greatest comfort you'll ever have. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Chloe. It's really, really been a privilege being with you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.